intervient à ce niveau-là. Voyez. Donc, pourquoi on publie? C'est d'abord pour soi-même. Mais si on reste là, ce serait simplement un peu d'égoïsme intellectuel. Pourquoi on publie également pour la société? Pour qu'il y ait un impact, pour que la recherche ait un impact sur la société. Et c'est un peu le but, par exemple, que se fixe le CODESRIA. Le but est que les publications faites puissent tomber dans les mains des planificateurs, puissent tomber dans les mains, par exemple, d'un juge, d'un législateur, qui, eux, ont un pouvoir de faire des changements. Donc, la doctrine en soi est un instrument de transformation sociale. Donc, quelque part, bien compris, pour avoir un impact sur la société. Je ne vais pas être long, donc pour conclure, je ne peux qu'encourager ce genre d'événements, ce genre de table ronde qui permettent d'outiller tout un chacun de nous pour la dissémination et pour l'avancement des connaissances. Je vous remercie.
Thank you, Professor Bari. And it is from here where we have, where I invite Ian. Ian comes from the field of child policy and advocacy, and one of the very important point that Professor Bari made is how it is important for our research to impact policy, and I think that is very important. The other dimension of it is also how our research can be impacted by policies, and this is where Ian comes in, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Tatik. Good afternoon, everybody. I was speaking English for a linguistic balance, but I sometimes get confused and I start speaking in French, so please remind me if I do. I don't know if I have a lot to add to this very distinguished lineup. I think there are a few things that I would point out. The first thing, and I'm not so much talking about research in the specific academic sense of furthering one's academic credentials and career, but if we look at research in the broader sense, first thing I'd say is we live in a world where there's a huge explosion of information. There's a huge now availability and access to all sorts of material, research, pseudo-research, advocacy, all sorts of opinions, fake news, you name it. And so this means that decision makers, managers, administrators, actors who are working for children or in any other field are confronted, first of all, with this really great volume of information and research. So what do? I guess a lot of people just stop reading. I think there's a lot now of people who don't read very much because they're so busy running to meetings and answering emails and doing all the other things that decision makers and managers do, that there isn't really the opportunity to digest, to read, to select, to filter what is the most relevant and important research for the particular issues you're dealing with. Now, it's paradoxical because with all the modern means of technology and so on and IT, it should be possible to filter, but I think we do have an issue. So if you do studies, you will find that in decision makers and policy makers, and one of the articles in the African Journal of Evaluation, there was a special issue on South Africa, they looked at decision makers and what is the attitude of decision makers to evidence? What sort of evidence do they need? The general point of view of decision makers was that we, and these were senior civil servants, was we need evidence. We should be using more evidence. We should be using more research. But in reality, when you ask them what it is they use, very often it's a small select group that they go to for advice on issues. And if you go across ministries and sectors, some of the same names pop up. So there's an issue here of really how do decision makers, how do people who allocate resources, who take decisions about children or any other aspect of public life, how do they manage to get some degree of balance, some degree of synthesis Of course, in the evaluation field, one way of doing this is what the so-called systematic reviews or the meta-evaluation, where you bring together the results of many evaluations on a given topic and to try to come out with a synthesis of the best available information and knowledge on a particular issue. So I think there's been a huge explosion of information, and as a result, decision-making and policy becomes very complex. And the issues are complex. And I think, again, when we did the symposium on the child in Senegal, I think I started out by thinking, well, really, there is knowledge there with the researchers and the academics and in CODESRIA, and then there are decision makers and the actors, and we just need to bring them together so the people with the knowledge can give the knowledge to the people who take in the decisions and to the actors on the ground. This, of course, is a very inadequate and a very insufficient way of looking at the issue. I think that the issues to do with children and youth in contemporary societies across the world are complex issues where there is no single discipline, there's no single set of right answers, but the challenge is to co-produce, is to work together with children and young people, with practitioners, with decision makers and managers, with tired old retirees like myself, and with academics and researchers and evaluators. So we together, so breaking these silos, breaking down the barriers, so that we're beginning to understand each other's mode of thinking, the needs and requirements of decision makers and managers. What are the real issues? What are the real questions? The other thing we found when we made our invitation for submissions for our symposium is a lot of the submissions from researchers and from the evaluators, to an extent, were answering questions which were valid within a research context. They may work for do a thesis, or they might work to get published because you're asking the question. And the question in evaluation, for example, that you sometimes get the impression that the questions in evaluation, which is the key issue, are changed in order to fit the method, so that you can do a fancy, experimental design evaluation on a particular topic. So in the end, the method will drive the question. And of course, the question should drive the method and the choice of methods, and usually more than one method. So getting the questions right, asking the right questions, being able to come up with some answers which will be useful for debate and discussion, and sometimes some of the answers might be, we just need to do further research. That's a bit difficult sometimes. Decision makers spend money, they commission a study or a piece of research, and the conclusion is, well, the problem was more complicated than you think, and we think you really need more research. In reality, that is not surprising, and I think one of the other issues is that many organizations now dealing in the area of children and childhood, faced with the complexity of the issues, faced with the imperatives of the Convention on Child Rights and some of the other thinking globally, now have understood that research about children is not about on children, it is with children and engaging children and involving children in that. But they're not very good at doing it, because they don't have the tradition or the staff or the resources or the time to do it. So this is an opportunity for the researchers that you are to perhaps to come along and to propose some methods and approaches which will help to have a better understanding of the real lives and the diversity and the plurality of the lives of children. So I think that's a huge challenge for everybody. And I think the other challenge which we were pushing in our symposium was to get away from this notion of this sort of pseudo-research, which is really consultant studies where people run around for a few weeks or months looking for information to back up a decision, to support a decision basically already taken, or to justify a policy already adopted, which may very well perhaps be a good policy. But it's not really looking at all the dimensions of the issue. What are going to be the effects of the implementation of these policies? What about the anticipated effects? What about the diversity of contexts and environments, which mean that a policy might be good at one point in time and in one region of the country, and it might not be nearly as good at another point of time, even in the same country, in another region, or with another social or ethnic group. So I think that this whole notion of accompanying policy by ongoing research, and this is one of the things we've also been discussing with IRD and CODESRIA and others, is how can we get away from this fragmented, spasmodic approach, and how can you get into long-term programs, multidiscipline, multi-actor, multi-level, which will help to generate a volume and wealth of understanding. Some of it's been happening, and some of the work on the Young Lives Project, which may not be a model, but nevertheless they have been able to do a whole series series of publications, particularly about the lives of children in Vietnam, Ethiopia, Peru, and I think in southern India, where they've been focusing the work of, and it's been a project running for 15 or 20 years now, looking at the lives of children, longitudinal studies, not just snapshots, not just cross-cutting examinations of the current status, as a lot of these studies are. We really take a look, we drill down, we look in depth. But a lot of this is being funded by and implemented in the North. Now, even if we have good people sitting in the North, like my friends here, who know very well the South or the majority, they are still governed by funding mechanisms and sometimes by publishing criteria and so on, which are not adapted to the circumstances in the continent. And one of my challenges in my teaching in Paris, for example, at Sciences Po, and I teach a course on child policy and child rights, where the question is, what does it take to get really effective action, real change in the lives of children? And I always look for research and studies coming from the continent, conducted in the various countries by researchers from those countries. And we have some very interesting projects, including Toko Kaimi's book, which is sitting over here, and the work of Afuitum Danso and others. And this is, of course, what CODESRIA is about. And as far as I can, I promote and encourage CODESRIA publications. I would say in some circumstances, it's a bit of a pity that with research, it takes so long to bring it out. So you have a nice meeting and a good colloquium, and 3 or 4 or 5 years later, sometimes you get the publication. It sort of maybe sometimes dilutes a little bit the effect or the impact. But I think overall we should congratulate CODESRIA for doing this, and the work you did on child research and the conference on child research, more than 10 years ago. Maybe it's the time now with all the changes in the lives of children. And the thing about children too is we must always remember, when it comes to research on children are not some little side interest and a few people who are going to, grow up and so on. Children are half the population of our countries here. Half the population are under 18. These are citizens, and it is the long-term political stability of the country, it's the economic productivity, the success of the country. So it's really central to policy processes. So again, I think it's the important thing is to make this connection between the specific topics you're studying now and how they feed in to some of the broader questions and some of the complex issues. And I think, and they are complex issues in the sense, as you've discussed now in this workshop, that an issue, whatever it may be, early marriage, child labor, birth registration, child mortality, they are not susceptible to a single answer, to a single formula, to a single recipe, although sometimes we pretend that it's the case and we ask for funding like that. They are the product of a multiple interaction of forces and dynamics we can't predict, we don't understand, which do not unfold in a logical and sequential manner, and therefore the role of research on the lives of children with children is so important to make sure that these policies are implemented in a situation of acute resource scarcity and sometimes of political conflict and fragility. So I suppose my comments are really to say that we need to really think, as well as the academic track and the credibility of the research, and that's important, that it's credible, we need to be thinking about its utilization and how it can be helpful to build a better society. And I think, again, we all have the duty then to begin to understand as to how decisions are taken and how processes work, how budgets are produced at the level of national assemblies and parliaments, how laws are developed and articulated before they become adopted, by the national assemblies, how slogans like health for all and education for all and the sustainable development goals, how these emerge, what are the forces and so on. Because if we understand that, we can then position ourselves a lot better to take advantage of wherever opportunities are offered for research, and also focus our research in a way which will then bring about changes and improvements in policies. And I think I've said, ask the right questions, understand the processes we're dealing with, understand how people think. And I think a lot of the time now we need to have unconventional methods. I like very much the cartoon book on the thesis. We have to find other ways of communicating the message. Somebody else I know in the United States, I go to meetings there, the American Evaluation Association, is very experienced. Joe Holy says, decision makers, they don't read. You have to ask for a briefing. You have to give a personal briefing, a short personal briefing. Somebody else who works with parliamentarians in one of the states in the United States, Idaho, he says, our parliamentarians, they're not necessarily interested in being research reports. They're like anecdotes. They like stories. They like a human dimension to the research findings. That's what will make a legislator wake up and sometimes go out and make a speech and promote a change. And I think finally, the other thing to remember, of course, is that when it comes to the evidence and the debates about public policy is complex, that there is not one single body of evidence, it's competing evidence, and so one has to really try to make sure that one is tuned in and one does not sound as if I have the only conceivable truth and this is the truth and you take it or leave it. I think that one is contributing to ongoing debates, and in some cases it will take 5 or 10 or 15 years for a policy issue to become decided upon, and even then all policies are compromises. They're a compromise between political acceptability, cultural, economic, technical, dimensions. They're a compromise, and they will have to be continuously adapted and adjusted over time to keep on responding to the changing circumstances. So understanding the dynamic of the lives of children, the dynamics of our societies, getting away from one-dimensional, one-sectoral, one solution, one question, one method type approaches. I think we have to get away from this and come out in this wide, confusing world, which of course you've been expertly guided through in the course of this institute, and I'm sure you will continue for the future. So I'll stop there, but I'm very open to questions because I've been a long time, bumping into all sorts of different structures, and I think there are lots of barriers to learning, lots of barriers to mindsets about what people think is credible and not credible evidence and what will make them change their minds. I sometimes think a nuclear bomb is what is necessary in some circumstances, but of course that would not be very acceptable because the collateral damage would be too great. But I do think we have real issues of helping to change the systemic and institutional biases which shape both academic communities, political communities, and international organizations in order to try to have a much more open-minded, a much more pragmatic, and a much more incremental and opportunistic, seizing opportunities when they open to change and improve the lives of children with and in listening to those children themselves. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ian, and I would now like to invite Dr. Devine, and I would like to invite him and take a particular take on to the discussion, to the debate. So far we've heard on how we can publish as academics and what kinds of formats our publication can take and so on and so forth. And this is from the sort of the perspective of the writers, the authors who want to publish, right? And as the head of the publication and dissemination office in CODESRIA, I would like us to sort of tell us the publisher's point of view. I want us to discuss about, I want us to get to the core of, to the mantle of the publishing process. What does it involve, from the very initial point of sort of receiving, for example, a proposal, a book proposal, to the review process that we have to go through, and the sort of your role, your responsibilities as editors. I want us to sort of give us an angle from that publisher's point of view, sort of the complex process and the process that we don't see often as authors, right? So can you please sort of start with that and then go on with the other questions and points for the panel.
Tatik, I forgot to congratulate Tatik on this fantastic publication in English, but really wonderful publication on the African child. So you should all congratulate, give him a round of applause. It's a great piece of work. Great piece of work.
Thank you.
Now we need the French version.
Thank you for the invitation, and also sorry to have come late to the panel. It's because of many important things that we need to do to ensure that the publishing and communicating of research on childhood continues. I will start with a caveat. First, I'm not an expert on childhood. Secondly, I don't think I'm an expert on writing. But I happen to be in the publications program, which I can no longer say I am 2 months old, but I am fairly very young in the publications program, like about February when I started. But before that, I have had the opportunity to head other publishing programs elsewhere also. I think One should start by first emphasizing that at CODESRIA, publishing African scholars, African writers and researchers, it is a core aspect of our mandate, and that we take this seriously as a development project, as contribution to the continent, but it's also a political project, because for us, giving a voice to the continent and also ensuring that there are alternative stories outside, apart from what we read from the European press and writing and publishing houses, contributes, to constituting and forming another human story. And that Europe or Socrates and all of these thinkers and Platos are not the only reliable frameworks for one to be able to make sense to, that one needs to also bring in African voices, for this contribution. So we do generate and also promote this knowledge production by Africans for Africans, and also which mainly reflect on African realities and also participate in this global conversation. And it's in the light of this that over the years, more than 44 years, we have generated and produced knowledge on questions related to African realities. And youth is at the center. Children are at the center of that reality. And it is not a surprise that the Child and Youth Institute is one of the important institutes or thematic institutes for CODESRIA, because we think that if there is any place, to generate knowledge and reference frameworks for young people on the in the world, you need to come to the African continent, where more than 60% is young. So we should be at the forefront of producing such knowledge. So if you look at our catalog over the years, we've actually produced some of the groundbreaking work around children and also childhood studies, and some of those who have gone on to write about children and youth studies have also emerged out of CODESRIA research and also different CODESRIA programs. So this is really important, to buttress. But this also comes out of an investment in resources, financial resources, the resources of the time of workers at the Secretariat, and also a network of scholars across the world who contribute to ensure that this knowledge, actually comes alive. So I think it's important to start with that. And then I should maybe answer your question by starting from a point which is not so serious, but I think is very important. I am not sure how many people here cook when they go home. Yeah, I mean, cooking is one of those activities which has been pushed to the domestic, and even when you go outside, it is something which has been professionalized also by men, in many other places. But cooking is a very interesting activity, for some of us, who grew up in the kitchen. You begin to acquire some of the basic elements and fundamental principles of cooking by sitting and being forced to do things by grandmothers and aunties and other people, much to your own dislike. But as you grow up, these things constitute like the foundations of what you do every time you move into a place to cook. Like once you have traveled, for example, from a little village like where I came from and moved to a European place, and you find spices and stuff which are not familiar to you, you suddenly find that you begin to adapt this, to the basic principles that you did acquire, and that these basic principles stay with you and begin to define, what you are. I think that's the challenge that we face, on this continent, and as people who want to write and contribute to youth studies within a terrain which is already dominated by a number of voices which have become very imposing and very domineering. If you read the number of publications on youth studies, from on Africa, these are publications which are mainly published from outside, which means they are prepared, with some kinds of spices, which are not well embedded within the material experiences of people. And I think that's a very core challenge, that writing, especially on youth studies on the continent, has to be embedded within the material experiences of people. And these material experiences are the ways, only ways by which we can begin to make our voices heard. And it's a challenge that we throw to this Youth Institute, and also to the number of people or contributors or thinkers who want to contribute on writing, either on youth or childhood studies, on the continent. What does it mean, to be a child? What does it mean to be young? And what does it mean to reflect about this young lives? I would say that our role in the publications and disseminations program in CODESRIA is to ensure that this material that we receive is embedded in these material realities, but at the same time help us to understand the continent from perspectives that are deeply embedded in the material experiences of the continent. It's not just the mind and the body, but also within different environmental and everyday life experiences also. But I would say that every book we receive seems to have been written by somebody who thinks that their book is the best book. So every book always appears to be like the best book on earth. And I mean, you can understand, it takes a lot of effort and resources and time to write. So one needs to always appreciate when people put effort, to put the ideas through. Because it's a kind of a sacrifice, and also it's a pride which you put into this writing. But unfortunately, we live in a world with multiple gatekeepers, and our job is to try as much as possible to sieve and to keep this material. I can see that Professor Diop, who has one of his books with me for a long time, and knocks on my door on a daily basis to ask, what's happened to this book, and I tell him the book is still in process. And when I announced to him that such a great professor has written a book which has very bad reviews, he feels very unhappy, because he thinks years and years of experience as a professor should generate respect, from reviewers, because he has published, tons and tons of thousands of books. So, but every time you write, you are a new person. You are always a child every time you write. Because you're entering a space which you think you know, but at the same time you don't know, because you're open to people writing. And every good product at the end of the day is something which is co-produced. It's interdependent. It's co-produced by a network of reviewers, by a network of editors, by a network of copy editors. In fact, by the time your book comes back to you, you don't even recognize the sentences which you wrote, because someone has actually ensured that they put it quite well. But after an institute like this, we hope that you've spent enough time to put together some kind of a common framework or thought which you can all engage. And once that material reaches us, we begin to take decisions on who to send this for review. When it's come back from review, then we spend a lot of time trying to see if how to agree with the reviews and how to communicate this review to you, and then the process of revising the book then takes another long period, and then before we then send the book for copy editing, and then comes back, and there's a long series of editorial works and to and fro which happens between that. In fact, when you calculate the average time that some of the books have taken, yes, I mean, some very good books have taken up to 5 years to produce, some 2 years, some 3 years, and I think people with experiences of writing would attest to it, that it's a period of layering and a period of continuous engagement and reflection, so you can produce something, at the end of the day. But I would say that the terrain of youth studies on the continent is a very rich terrain and a very rich field. And that one would expect that any new engagement with this will help us to understand what the next big questions would be. How do we understand the continent through the lens of youth, rather than just reproducing empirical studies on youth. I think I'll end there for now. Thanks.
All right. We are likely to return to some of the things that have been said by the panelists. And for that, I would like to open the floor for questions and comments from the audience. But before that, I would like to say that the Executive Secretary of CODESRIA is with us, Dr. Godwin Moringa. He's sitting. Thank you for joining us. I know you are a very busy person. Yeah, the floor is now open for the audience to make interventions. All right. Microphone. Yeah, please, before asking your questions, introduce yourself and the institution that you come from.
Sure.
Thank you.
I'll try in English. Hello, everybody. My name is Ghislaine Mani. I'm in charge of the quality of early learning at Imagination Africa. It's an NGO located in Yoff, and we work for the promotion of learning through play for early childhood. So my question / suggestion would be, I've noticed that there are academics and researchers, who have developed pedagogic approaches, for schools like Maria Montessori, like Loris Malaguzzi, both in Italy, and created schools that have become very, very successful. Those schools are some of the most important, some of the most expensive schools in the world. And they have banked in the competences of the child, the capacities of the child, the genius of the child. That's what they promote. And so, like I said, you notice that those schools are very expensive. It's the elite of the world. A lot of people, the people who created Google, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, they've been to Montessori schools. The richest rapper in the world, PDD, he's been to a Montessori school. So the thing is, it looks like as human beings, we are not willing to invest time, energy, money into something that does not have value, right? So what I wanted to ask or suggest is that, can you, publishers, the academics, researchers, would it be helpful to do and to undertake research in that direction to promote the genius of the child, the capacities, the competences natural of the child, to maybe get to those policymakers, decision makers, to now make laws that will protect the child, because that's my question. Would it help?
Merci. Mon nom c'est Fabrice Tekou, je viens de l'Université du Bénin et j'ai deux petites questions. La première, c'est de savoir si les universités sont astreintes à un cours pour publier les articles dans certaines revues. Et la deuxième, à l'Université de Bénin en 2015, il y a une liste d'environ 58 revues qui sont affichées comme des revues fausses et qui ont ainsi emprisonné un grand nombre d'articles publiés par et même les professeurs, pas non seulement. Et donc, comment allons-nous faire pour identifier ce qui est une revue correcte, une revue autorisée, de ce qui ne l'est pas, dans le champ spécifique de l'enfance où il y en a encore peu pour les francophones. Je vous remercie.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais très rapidement me présenter. Je m'appelle Mam Ousmane Diène. Je suis membre d'une organisation qu'on appelle CNDREAO, Comité national de développement des réseaux pour l'éducation en Afrique de l'Ouest. Je suis également membre du RENADPE, le réseau national des acteurs pour le développement de la petite enfance. Voilà, je voudrais partager un peu mon expérience en matière d'écriture. Je pense que c'est très bien de faire venir les chercheurs, mais il y a beaucoup de savoir qui dorment dans des personnes qui ne sont pas des chercheurs ou bien qui n'ont pas le statut de chercheur. Et si nous continuons comme ça, eh bien nous risquons en tout cas en chemin de perdre énormément de ressources utiles au développement de l'enfant africain. Et pour l'illustrer, je vais citer une expérience. Il y a plusieurs années, j'ai publié, c'était la première fois que j'ai publié un article dans une revue internationale. À l'époque, j'étais éducateur dans une école élémentaire et je travaillais beaucoup sur les coopératives scolaires. Et j'ai eu la chance d'avoir rencontré le professeur Henri Desroches, qui était à l'époque directeur du collège coopératif de Paris. Et comme moi je travaillais sur la coopération scolaire, eh bien ça l'a intéressé fortement. Alors il m'a cuisiné sans que je me rende compte pour mesurer mon degré de militantisme, parce que moi je considère que c'est du militantisme. C'est-à-dire on milite pour l'éducation. Donc il l'a mesuré et il s'est rendu compte que vraiment j'étais un bon militant. Et il m'a poussé à écrire sur l'éducation coopérative. C'est dire quoi? C'est dire qu'à côté des praticiens, et les praticiens ils sont très nombreux, les chercheurs ne sont pas assez nombreux. Mais les praticiens ont besoin d'être accompagnés par les chercheurs pour faire des productions de qualité. Et c'est vraiment à ce travail-là que je voudrais en tout cas convier les chercheurs, parce qu'il y a énormément de choses que nous découvrons, des savoirs que nous produisons, mais nous n'osons pas les écrire parce que nous ne sommes pas accompagnés. L'écriture, c'est un exercice qui n'est pas facile. Il faut avoir du courage pour pouvoir écrire. Et pour cela, moi je crois qu'il y a une dynamique qu'il faut instaurer entre les praticiens et les chercheurs. Aujourd'hui, je continue mes recherches, mais dans un autre domaine, c'est dans le domaine de la pratique. Nous travaillons beaucoup sur la recherche pédagogique. Et nous expérimentons des innovations. Mais nous n'osons pas encore aujourd'hui les publier à un certain niveau parce que nous nous disons que nous ne sommes pas suffisamment accompagnés. Donc, de grâce, accompagnez-nous. Merci.
Merci beaucoup. Je m'appelle Jean-Pierre Diouf et je suis bibliothécaire au CODESRIA. En fait, comme les panélistes l'ont déjà souligné, publier n'est pas une chose aisée. Et quand en fait on a un document à publier, la première chose à se poser est de savoir où la publier. Je pense que le professeur Barry a essayé de tracer un peu les voies et moyens dans lesquels on peut s'y prendre pour publier. Mais moi je prends la parole juste pour poser une question, parce que j'ai pas entendu parler un peu des structures qui existent déjà et qui en fait produisent ou mettent en place les outils de publication. Je veux dire par là, j'ai pas beaucoup entendu. J'ai entendu bien sûr parler de livres, j'ai entendu parler, disons, de revues académiques, mais avant qu'on ait ces revues académiques, il y a des structures. Et je pense qu'il serait aussi important de mettre un peu l'accent là-dessus, parce que c'est grâce à ces structures-là que les revues, mais aussi, en fait, les livres peuvent être publiés. Et particulièrement sur le continent africain, je pense qu'il n'y a pas, d'après ma petite expérience de bibliothécaire, il n'y a pas beaucoup de structures, n'est-ce pas, qui en fait lancent des revues, et particulièrement sur la jeunesse et l'enfance. Je vous remercie.
Bonjour.
We just provide the panelists the opportunity to reflect on the question that have been raised so far. Who would like to start?
D'accord. Bonjour. Donc, je suis Rubiatou Kamcham. Je suis enseignante-chercheur à la faculté de droit au département de droit public de l'UCAD. Et je représente l'association des femmes universitaires qui s'appelle la COFULEF. Et je suis également chercheur au Centre d'études et de recherche-action sur la gouvernance. Je vais surtout poser une question, c'était de savoir est-ce qu'il y a pour le CODESRIA une situation de référence des publications, des éditions sur la jeunesse en Afrique. C'est un peu dans le même sens de ce que M. Diouf vient de souligner. Est-ce qu'il y a une situation de référence sur les publications sur l'enfant et la jeunesse en Afrique? Je me souviens aussi qu'il y a 2 ans, vous aviez fait un panel aussi sur une recherche sur le bébé. Et j'y avais participé, c'était extrêmement intéressant, mais bon, j'étais un peu déçue de ne pas voir de suite par rapport à ça, d'autant qu'au Sénégal et ici à l'hôpital FAN, à l'unité de pédopsychiatrie, vous avez l'observation du bébé qui fait l'objet de colloques tous les 2 ans sur le bébé africain. Et encore d'autres structures extrêmement intéressantes qui travaillent sur ces questions-là. C'était vraiment, je dois avouer. Bon, comme nous l'avons dit, théoricien certes, mais aussi pratique. Bon, nous aussi nous sommes sur le terrain pratique, sachant que cette année, notre centre de recherche a organisé un centre aéré pour les enfants sur une problématique des nouvelles technologies et les enfants et la construction de la personnalité de l'enfant. Voilà, un tout petit peu tout ça. Bon, d'abord répondons à cette question et peut-être que d'autres idées vont fuser.
All right, thank you. I think the question that have been raised related to first the one by Fabrice. It relates to how we academics have been in recent years. It's becoming common to receive email invitations from publishers who have who offer to publish our research work and to do it in a quick manner, like they can do it in 4 weeks, in 6 weeks, but you have to pay what they call the article processing fee. And how can we sort of distinguish these kinds of fake journals from those which we regard are reputable and produce credible knowledge? That is one. Linked to that is also a comment that was raised in relation to how there is now an increase in the corporatization of knowledge, and to do with is what comes with particularly journals that are extremely difficult to access for individual scholars because they have huge fees that they demand, and many of the journals, the Anglophone journals that we talked about, they have you have to purchase the article on individual basis, or you have to have an institutional subscription, and these are very difficult to do for particularly doctoral candidates and individual researchers who may not have the resources and means to access these journals. So how can we go around this issue of corporatization of knowledge? That is another area of reflection. And then the third point relates to if and whether there is a reference work on children and youth issues in the context of Africa, and this is particularly connected to the work of CODESRIA. So I would like the panelists to sort of reflect upon these points and provide us their perspectives. Thank you. All right, Professor Bari.
Donc, c'est presque pas des réponses, c'est aussi des contributions dans le débat, sans prétendre donc apporter des réponses précises. Pour l'intervention de Madame qui vient de Imagination Africa, effectivement, si la méthode Montessori ou même les écoles associées Brundtland et autres sont beaucoup appréciées, beaucoup aimées, pourtant au début, c'est que l'enfant, on exploite l'autonomie de l'enfant. Si un enfant veut jouer, il va jouer. Si un enfant, son intérêt, c'est de dessiner, il dessine. Et que fait Google aujourd'hui, ou les campus même pour les adultes, pour une heure de travail, d'où émerge une idée, ils sont capables de donner 5 ans de congé à quelqu'un. Mais l'idée qui va sortir dans ça permet à ces gens-là de gagner des milliards. Donc de la même manière, l'enfant à qui on donne le libre arbitre, libre examen, avec l'apport des adultes, exploite à fond ses capacités. Moi je me souviens, dès l'enfance on connaît jouer au ballon, c'était être vaillou et étudier par exemple les maths même si on n'aime pas, voici un bon élève. C'est maintenant que les parents laissent faire jouer les enfants parce que ça gagne des millions et des milliards. Vous voyez, donc combien de Pelé, combien de Maradona ont été mis de côté parce que le ballon est percé jour et de nuit à l'époque. Vous voyez, donc ça vient de la même manière. Donc je pense que, et ça revient à ce que je disais dans mes différents travaux et tout au long de cette activité. Tout doit être centré sur l'enfant. Mais l'adulte parfois a peur en disant, en le faisant, c'est qu'on installe l'enfant sur un piédestal. Non, on respecte plutôt l'autonomie de cet enfant-là. Mais ça ne veut pas dire qu'on ne peut pas avoir un droit d'équitance ou bien d'orientation. Mais l'enfant évolue, je suis content que vous apportez cet élément parce que lorsqu'on parle de plus en plus d'approche basée sur le droit de l'enfant, les gens pensent que c'est tout à fait nouveau. C'est le concept qu'on vient de conceptualiser, mais le Montessori existe depuis. Et dans le cadre même purement africain, si on fouille, on peut voir les classes d'âge ou le fait que à partir de l'initiation, on laisse les enfants quittent presque le village, ils sont à l'orée du village dans une case. Ils viennent manger, mais ils commencent à gérer eux-mêmes leur groupe d'âge et ils règlent eux-mêmes sous la direction d'un adulte qu'on appelle parfois SEMA, qui est comme leur cousin, c'est un grand frère à qui. Donc il y a de ces méthodes, de ces manières, je pense que sans être trop long, le but principal, c'est de laisser, respecter les droits de l'homme, laisser cet enfant son autonomie, sa dignité en quelque sorte. Dans le cadre de l'événement apporté par Fabrice, les fausses revues, les fausses maisons d'édition, je ne vais pas citer une maison d'édition. À titre de juriste, on prend beaucoup de précautions. Mais je vais dire que cette maison se trouve en Allemagne. Elle est bien connue presque de tous les chercheurs. Vous mettez un article ou une thèse ou un mémoire en ligne à l'instant, 4 heures après, vous avez un courriel qui vous propose de publier votre travail. Mais le problème est que cette maison est tellement réputée comme pierre de ressources intellectuelles que